All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the fall series of our Master of Beef webinars. We're really excited to have you on again tonight on October 11th. I'll give everybody just a few seconds to log on. I see our participant list going up. Here tonight with us too, we have our extension assistant, Sawyer Main. He's going to actually be leading the webinar tonight. I figured I would come on and introduce him as well. I have a prior commitment that I have to get to, but no worries. Sawyer will be here to answer any questions that anyone may have and help with the question and answer session at the end of the webinar as well. But with that, today we have Dr. Kenneth Burdine with us from the University of Kentucky. He's here to talk about some marketing strategies, so we're really excited to hear from him tonight. So without further ado, I'll make him the host. So thank you, Dr. Burdine.
Thanks, Mallory. Appreciate it. And thanks to Sawyer, and thanks for everybody for being on. I was looking at the list there, a lot of folks on, so I'm glad to see that so many people wanted to listen this evening. Are we good to go then? I go ahead and share. So my plan this evening, what I thought I would do is I would take some time and just walk through the current cattle market environment and, give you kind of my impression of where things are and, give you some, hate to use the word forecast, but kind of planning prices for this winter and certainly for spring, thinking about, those of you that are in the cow calf business or that sell heavy feeders. That'll probably be about the first 20, 25 minutes or so. And then the second 20, 25 minutes, I want to focus more on just some strategies and basic marketing things that I think are good for someone to know that are in the cattle business. So I'm going to walk through some of those things as well, based on my observations, some numbers that I've ran here, based on what I see. A little bit about me. I actually grew up in Central Kentucky, so I've been at the University of Kentucky for approximately, I guess I'm in my 24th year. I've been on faculty since 2012, but I worked in an extension role for 12 years while I did my graduate work part-time. So that's kind of my background. I grew up on a small beef cattle tobacco farm here in Central Kentucky. I actually grew up in the town just south of Lexington, where UK's campus is, where my office is now. So I feel blessed that I get to be on faculty so close to home. But I love state of Tennessee. In fact, my wife and I were down there this past week. She's a teacher, was on fall break, and I took a few days off, and we spent some time in the Smokies. So we enjoy going to the South and visiting the state of Tennessee. So I appreciate the invite, a chance to visit with you this evening. So with no further ado, I'm gonna kind of roll through some things now. As we think about markets, the last several years have just thrown so many things at cattle markets, and I'm sure you've seen something like this or thought through all these things. But I remember in the summer of 2019, I was at a cattle market. Well, I was at a outlet conference that I attend every year that involves a large number of states, where we kind of share ideas about outlook for various things. And I was talking about cattle at the time. And we were talking about that Tyson fire in Holcomb, Kansas, and what a shock to the market that was. And that was a plant that accounted for about 5% of total U.S. beef packing capacity, and what a shock that was to the market. And it's impossible not to think that that seems small compared to what happened in 2020 and 2021. But certainly we had the COVID impacts in the marketplace. We really were tight on process capacity prior to COVID, and then obviously with the shutdowns and so forth and reduced capacity, we got really tight on capacity, and we're very short. Between the summer of 2020 and the summer of 2021, feed price basically doubled. Certainly corn price did, and of course corn prices crept up this past crop year as well. We've had significant drought in a large part of the country for the last 2 years. The drought area is actually bigger now than it has been maybe any time in the past couple of years, and I'll show you some monitors here in just a minute on that. Then we think about the Russia-Ukraine situation and the uncertainty that's bringing. And bottom line, it's really just been a frustrating market since 2016. We had a really strong cattle market in 14 and 15, but things changed pretty quickly. We all know that. We're in really about our fifth or sixth year of just a frustrating type cattle market. So many things that have been at play impacting us in the cow-calf and feeder cattle sectors. I always like to start my discussions about the market with just kind of an overview of production of our three main meats: beef, pork, and chicken broilers. And a few things I want to point out. The first thing to understand, or I think to know, is that pork production is going to be down this year. Chicken production is going to be up. Chicken production being up is normal. If you look at 2022 and 2023 on the broiler side, that's actually not a big increase in production. The poultry system is really set up kind of to deliver a fairly inexpensive source of protein. So it's not uncommon at all to see 2 and 3% production increases year over year. So what we're seeing this year and what I think we'll see next year will actually be fairly small. 2021 was a good year in the pork sector, a very good year, I would say. 2022 has been a pretty good year. Prices have been fine, but feed costs have taken a bite out of that for a big chunk. But we're going to see more pork on the market in 2023. But the one that really stands out, as we've talked about our main competitors already, is the beef market. We're going to see more or less flat consumption in 2022, or sorry, flat production in 2022. And we're going to do that on a smaller cow herd. And, the only way to do that is two things, and you're all well aware of this. We have pulled a lot of cattle forward, meaning due to dry weather, we've just simply had to move some cattle sooner than we probably would have. And at the same time, we've slaughtered a lot of cows. So those two things together are why we've managed to produce about the same number of pounds as we did last year on a smaller cow herd. If you look at 2023, though, and that's my estimate, the star there means that I didn't use USDA's estimate because I actually thought they were a little bit high on this. But I think we're going to see about a 5% decrease in beef production next year, and that's very significant. So as we start to see that, as we start to see folks scrambling for smaller quantities of beef, it should bode well for prices throughout the system, including the fed cattle market and eventually the feeder cattle markets that we largely play in. And we're starting to see some of that already, but I really think 2023 should be the year that we really see a lot of those benefits. I tend to be kind of big. I tend not to think big picture and think more about cattle, but I want to show just one more slide about kind of the retail beef system as compared to our two main competitors. So this price series is not perfect. It's flawed in some ways, but this is monthly retail average price for beef, kind of the light blue there, for pork, the red, and then for broilers, kind of the darker blue or black there at the bottom. And I just like to point this out when I talk to cattle groups, is that as beef producers, and I am a beef producer myself on a small scale, we produce a fairly expensive product pound per pound. But that's because I think there's preference for it and people are willing to pay that. So I like to point that out for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it speaks to consumer preference for beef. I think consumer demand for beef is very strong. We certainly saw that the last couple of years. But it also means that at times we can be more vulnerable to substitution when situations when incomes are strapped or something like that. So we tend to be a bit more vulnerable to things like recessions or shocks to the economy because we are the most expensive meat on the plate, at least in terms of these three main meat species. I'm going to show you a lot of things like this tonight. I tend to think a lot of graphs and bullets and slides and things like that. But I always like to start out and kind of start out with the retail side, move into slaughter cattle, and then talk about feeders. But this is a slide of slaughter steer prices, and I'm in a feeder cattle state just like you all. We don't finish very many cattle in Kentucky. We're a feeder cattle state. Most of our cattle leave the state and be finished elsewhere. But I always say if the cattle market had a pulse, it really is the fed cattle market, and that really sets a lot of things into place. And I want you to notice the dotted line, which is 2021. Notice we began 2021 with fed cattle, with a fed steer price somewhere around, $1.08 to $1.12, something like that. But notice that steady improvement throughout virtually all of 2021. I remember doing a program in August of 2021 and talking to, with somebody, could we see $1.40 steers in the spring of 2022? And we did. We've spent most of this year between about $1.36 and $1.41 or so. And about $1.36 and $1.46. And we've pushed back over $1.45 here recently. So I think the tight supplies are starting to manifest themselves more and more in the fed cattle market. And then we see that kind of trickle down ultimately the feeder cattle markets that I'll show you later, a little closer to home. One of the reasons why that's been the case, and excuse me, I don't think this got enough attention really the last couple of years, but because so many things were going on, particularly with COVID and with grain prices and so forth. I don't think we talked enough about the fact that we actually set a record for U.S. beef exports in 2021. We did. It was an incredible export year. And you may or may not have heard this, but again, blue lines 2022, dotted lines 2021. But through the first 8 months, we've got data on this from January to August. For the first 8 months, we're on track to actually break that record in 2022, and I think we will. Production is going to be lower in the fourth quarter because frankly we've killed so many cows already. We can't, we're kind of catching up on the supply side with cattle on feed and so forth. But I do think when the dust settles, this will be another record year for beef exports, and I don't want to lose sight of how important that is. Typical year we export about 13% of our beef, but it's a very significant amount in terms of how much value it actually adds to the cattle that we sell in the U.S. One of the big reasons for that has been, just how active China's been. This chart tells the story pretty well. You can look at the red line there, which is the average exports to China from 2016 to 2020, and they were awfully small. When we first began trading with China, which I believe was in the fall of 19, and I could be wrong about my years. They've run together ever since COVID on me pretty bad. But I remember telling folks that, China accounted for something between 1 and 0.2% of our beef production. And right now, China is our third largest export destination behind only Japan and South Korea. So I think they're the big reason why we've seen such an increase in exports here the last 24 months or so. That's been very significant. The other factor that I certainly can't overplay or overspeak to is the significance of the drought that we've been dealing with. And I like to do this sometimes. I grabbed a drought monitor from August of last year, and I grabbed that's on your left. I grabbed this kind of for just the reason I was in Fargo, North Dakota, such about right here, about the time this drought monitor came out. And I remember when I was kind of flying down into Fargo. I was there for that same conference I mentioned going to in 2019. But it was so brown and so yellow from the plane, and I can remember distinctly you could see the circular green areas where there was center pivot irrigation. And I don't know that I'd ever seen that far north, even in a time period like August. It wouldn't have been as uncommon in some parts of the U.S. But to see that in the northern plains really kind of caught my eyes to how dry it was up there. Of course, it's been dry in the far west for a long time. If you kind of shift to the right now, this is October 4, or sorry, this is from October 4. This is the most recent monitor that I've got. A new one comes out on Thursday, but this is the most recent one that I have. And, you can say that it's maybe a little bit less intense in the northern plains than the west, and that would be accurate. I won't argue with you on that, but it's still plenty dry out there, very dry. They're in abnormally dry to moderate drought pretty much across the board with some pockets of extreme drought. But obviously that drought has moved into kind of the southern plains, and this is where the bulk of our cows tend to be, kind of here in what I call the southern plains, Texas, Oklahoma, what have you. And the southeast, where myself and you all really are, I can tell you just anecdotally from where I play farmer here in Central Kentucky, we had gotten fairly dry early in the summer. And we got some really good timely rains from about maybe the end of June through about July. But then we started getting dry again early August. And honestly, the last 3 weeks, maybe 4, I've just been surprised how much things have deteriorated. We we were excited about prospects of fall grazing and stockpiling grass and a lot of things. And it looks like we're going to have to be looking for more hay here, I think, given the way that the fall growth has been so far. So that's kind of been the story. So, just eyeballing that, that's 80% of the US in a bare minimum dry weather. And if you think about where the cows are, it's where the bulk of the cows are, right? There's a lot fewer cows in the Northeast, which is kind of the area that's probably got the least impact in terms of dry weather right now. So that's been an issue throughout the year. And again, it's this Southern Plains area that's probably been the most impacted in 2022. And because of that, I mentioned this earlier, but we've moved a lot of cows early this year. Some cows that maybe we're going to cull this fall got culled during the spring or summer. Probably some cows, frankly, that wouldn't have been culled, that just simply had to be culled, especially in the Southern Plains, left the farms this past year. Again, dotted line 2021, blue line 2022. You can just kind of tell by looking at those lines that there's been a big increase in beef cow slaughter virtually from the start of 2022 up to where we are now. Now, to put this into perspective a little bit, right now I've got beef cow slaughter data through through the third week of September. So that'll kind of put it in perspective for you. So through almost 9 months, but we've slaughtered 330,000 more beef cows during that time period than a year ago. And I would remind you that because of COVID and high ground beef prices, 2021 was actually a fairly high beef cow slaughter year as well. So this is significant. If you're more of a percentage person, beef cow slaughter is 13% higher this year than last year, through the third week of September. So that's significant. We actually came into 2021 with a smaller cow herd, was down about 2.5%. And something else that USDA did, they didn't talk about it a lot, but they actually went back and revised downward the 2021 number. It's kind of one way. The best way to think about it for me is to think about is kind of think longer term. So coming into 2022, we were down about 1.5 million cows from 2019. So in other words, from this point to this point, we're down about 1.5 million cows. And my best guess is we'll shave about another 800,000 cows off of that when we actually know what the numbers are for January of 2023. So that's going to be something close to about an 8% decrease in beef cow numbers over 4 years. So very significant. The cow herds are getting smaller, and while weather's been part of the driver in that and prices, the only good news is that's what needs to happen to help us improve some on the calf price side, which is kind of what we're likely to see, I think, in 2023. We saw some of earlier this summer even. In a lot of ways, it's been the perfect storm for beef herd liquidation. We've had several challenging years back to back here at the cow calf level for sure, where the cow management decisions are made. You all don't need me to tell you that. We had the dry weather, and we've had some really strong cull cow prices. They have pulled back a little bit since summer, but we're still seeing. I was kind of using 80-85% boning cow kind of as my baseline, and those average dressing cows in Kentucky are still in the low to mid 70s, and some of the higher dresses are still around 80, upper 70s, low 80s. So it's still a good it's still a good cull cow market historically. And when you've got weather challenges, when you've had some back-to-back years of calf prices that didn't seem to cover all your cost, and then you've got a high cull cow market, it's a recipe to move some cows, and that's just what we've done. I grabbed some Kentucky prices just to kind of give you some perspective on trends. And one of the great things about myself talking to a Tennessee audience is there's just so many similarities between Kentucky and Tennessee's cattle markets. We are very, very similar. We have the same type of systems, a lot of the same type of cattle. With some exceptions, a lot similar forages, and our markets move very much together. They're going to tend to do the same things given our locations and so forth. So the heavy feeder cattle market has been pretty strong. It has pulled back a little bit. The numbers that I use here are our state average prices, and these These are kind of the nondescript cattle. So this doesn't include the cattle that are value added or fancy, or it's kind of biased by smaller lot sizes and things like that. So this understates the value of large groups or high quality type cattle. But we had been in the 160s for a while. We pulled back to about 158, 159 in October. But just scanning our market reports, 8 weight steers in Kentucky, the groups are still up in the 160s, some pushing 170. So yeah, they're off a nickel or more from where they were maybe 6 weeks ago. But it's been a pretty good market. Folks that bought calves back in the spring and put them on grass and sold them in this market have done pretty well. So it's been a good year for most of our stocker operators, at least in terms of the buy sell margin. Now, how well pasture growth cooperated and things are going to be certainly a regional type thing, but the margins themselves have been pretty decent. Our calf market has dropped a little over a dime in Kentucky, and yours has done about the same. If you move deeper into the South, maybe more like 15 cents. Some of that is seasonal, but it's been exacerbated a little bit by what we've seen, I think, in in feeder cattle futures. And I'll mention that here in just a sec. But I don't want to get wrapped up in the immediate thing so much, but kind of think big picture. What do the next several months hopefully think about, this winter and this spring? Despite the fact this calf market has dropped more than I would have thought it would seasonally, this is going to be the best fall market we've had for calves since 2015. That 15 market dropped sharply. We started 15 with calves, I can't remember, 5 weeks during Kentucky, I think averaged like 260 or something like that in the spring of 2015. He was down to about $2 by fall. And then by the time we got to 2016, he was in the $1.40 range. So, we're going to average better than that in 2022. I really thought that we might not see this break in calf prices that we've seen since August. About 6 weeks ago, the spring 2023 feeder cattle futures were up in the 190s. And had we held that, I think we could have seen virtually a flat calf market, but we've taken about 15 cents a hundredweight off of that springboard. So what that means is folks that are buying some of these calves this fall and putting them into what I kind of call backgrounding program, a feed-based program, have got lower expectations of sale price in the spring. So that that gets bid back into lower calf prices. So we're not going to see the run that I thought we would. But again, a good calf market compared to the last several years. I'm still excited about spring. The boards dropped some, but I made this comment in Cattle Market Notes today when I sent that out. There's so many times that I've said, this calf market just needs some green grass. And when I think about the tight supply of calves that we're going to see in the spring, and I think about what's going to happen when that grass starts growing in the spring, I think we're going to see a really good calf market. I think it'll be comparable to 2014. I think our state average prices and yours will be over $2 a pound for a 550-pound steer. And I think you'll see groups, large groups of 5-weight steers moving for 210 to 220, if I had to guess. I think you'll see a really good spring calf market. I think next year's the year we really reap a lot of the benefits of the tight supplies that we've kind of not gotten to benefit from so much this year because we found other ways to kind of increase supply by borrowing from the future almost. 8-weight steers in the spring next year, if you're more like winter backcountry type, if you move heavier feeders, I think they'll be in the 170s for groups. That's about where the board is. Transportation costs and high fuel don't help basis, obviously, but the fundamentals are there. So I think we'll see, we may see state averages in Kentucky and Tennessee in the 160s, but I think we'll see, good quality groups of 8-weight steers in the 170s. So I think it's going to be a solid year. Obviously, we got to deal with feed prices, and that's why this calf market's gotten softer this fall, because we're past the time when forage drives a lot of that, and the drier it gets in the fall, the less opportunity there is to graze into the fall. So we kind of got to bear the full brunt of those feed costs. But anytime I talk to folks about that, I always say don't adjust your program just based on one thing. If you typically do winter cattle on purchase feed, don't just assume you can't do it. Run the numbers and see. Value gain tends to move with feed costs. So, you may be surprised given the spring board, what calf prices do this fall. There may still be room to run your normal program and background some calves through winter this year. So I want to shift gears now kind of for the second half of this discussion and just kind of share some things with you. I love talking about the market and I do enjoy that kind of stuff. But I also like to try and think, okay, what are some things that I can leave an audience with that they might be able to use as we go forward? So these are some things that I think might be valuable, some things that I want, that I try and teach my Kentucky producers. Hopefully there's some value here to you. I'm going to walk through just kind of five topics fairly quickly here, but I want to talk about value of gain versus cost of gain. And because I think so many people confuse those two things and don't use value of gain appropriately. And whether you're a cow-calf operator or whether you're a stocker operator background, and I assume there's both on the webinar this evening, it's important to know, kind of how to look at that. I'm going to talk more about calf values, but the same thing applies on heavy feeders too. And then secondly, don't stop doing the little things, respond to market signals. I'm going to show you some data about, preconditioned and wean calves versus green calves. I'm going to talk to you about bulls and steers. I'm going to talk to you about lighter muscling calves, things like that. The market tends to reward us for doing. We'll talk about lot size. And again, if I were in a major cattle producing state that had a lot of really large operations, this is not as big a deal, but in Kentucky and I think in Tennessee as well, we tend to have a lot of small cattle operations. We tend to move a lot of calves in small groups, and we need to understand how that impacts the value of our calves and how we can use that as a tool to add value to the calves that we sell. And then I want to very briefly just talk about two quick things, and these will be very, very quick, but I want to just make sure you're aware of some risk management tools that are out there available to you. And I just want to wrap up by just talking about the importance of thinking long-term. And, it's so easy sometimes, I think, to manage a cow-calf operation as though it exists in a single year, when in reality, every one of our cows are a multi-year investment. And thinking about it that way sometimes impacts how we look at our operations. So I'm going to start with just this simple question that I'm sure you've had this posed to you before, but it's what are additional pounds of weaning weight truly worth? So this can be as simple as, what if I change genetics such that I wean 600-pound calves instead of 550-pound calves, or if I think about it this way, if I can wean my calves at 550 pounds and add another 100 pounds through a preconditioning program or something, I've got to be able to look at, okay, what is the value of pounds I can potentially add through something like that? So one of the most common mistakes that people make when they try to analyze decisions for a cattle operation is they don't consider price slide appropriately when they think about value of gain. And I'll give you an example of when I've heard something like this done. I've heard someone say something effective, okay, I've got a feed ration here where I can put on gain for $1 a pound. That's feed cost, vet cost, everything, labor, they'll say it's total cost of gain $1 a pound. And they'll say, okay, 550-pound calves are selling for $1.50. So I can add pounds for $1 and sell it for $1.50 and make 50 cents on every pound that I add. And that's just simply not true, because we know what price slide does to values. So we're on the same page. When I use the term price slide, I'm referring to really the price discount as cattle get heavier. And we typically see this, especially on lighter calves. Sometimes in high feed prices, we don't see it too much, and feed prices are sure high right now. But this idea that as cattle get bigger, their price per pound gets lower. So you can't compare cost of gain to sale price and use that shortcut to determine if I can profitably add pounds to cattle. So simple illustration, I'm going to assume a price slide of $10 a hundredweight. And again, what that means is that I'm saying if the price slide's $10 a hundredweight, what that means is the price decreases by 10 cents a pound for every 100 pounds additional weight that I have on cattle. So if a 550-pound steer calf we're selling for $1.40, that steer is worth $770 right now. Okay. Using a $10 price slide, again, that's 10 cents of price discount for every 100 pounds. That means a 600-pound steer, which is 50 pounds heavier, would take half of that $10 discount. So that 600-pound steer might sell for $1.35. He's worth $810. The difference in the value of that 600-pound steer, 550-pound steer is $40. $810 minus the 770. So what that really means is $40 over 50 pounds. Those additional 50 pounds were actually worth 80 pounds each. That's how much additional value there was. That's the value gain. And that's the number that matters. And I can do this same thing for adding 100 pounds or 300 or whatever. The actual number will change a little bit, but the concept itself won't. The idea is I've got to build in price slide, or that price discount has got to get heavier to consider value gain. So if someone says, I can put on gain for $1 a pound and 5-weight steers are selling for $1.40, I can make money. Not necessarily. I've got to put those pounds on for less than the true value of gain. And I've got to use that by incorporating price slide. The only way I can compare cost of gain to value gain is if there is no price slide, and ordinarily you're going to have to deal with that. So understand value gain, it's important. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time walking through this, but what I want you to understand, and I love to do tables like this when I talk to groups. This is something you can kind of take home with you, if you will, via the video, and kind of have an idea of how this plays out in different markets. But what I showed you before, and this is all based on 50 pound increase in weight. So I'm just kind of assuming a fairly small change here. Again, if I use a bigger change, the number is going to change some too. But there's that $1.40, 550-pound steer calf. And if I add 50 pounds to him at a $10 hundredweight slide, value at gain is about 80 cents. Okay, I just showed you that. Now, the more discount there is as calves get heavier, okay, the lower the value gain becomes. And this makes sense, right? If that 5 weight's $1.40, and I add 50 pounds, and I'm going to shave half of $10 off of that price. If the base is $1.40 and I add 50 pounds and it's a $15 hundredweight price slide, then I'm going to shave $7.50 a hundredweight off of that price. So in that case, that value gain drops to about 50 cents. And similarly, in a market where we think of what we might have had this past, what we might have this year, where slide is more narrow and there's more incentive, or feedlots want to place heavier cattle, maybe there's a smaller price slide. If that's a $5 price slide per hundredweight, then that value gain's higher. And I'm going to just kind of fill this out as we talk, but what I want you to just to know is that at some point, the price slide can get steep enough that there's no incentive whatsoever to add weight to cattle. And of course, definitely at some point, the value gain may get to the point where it does not make sense to spend the money to put those additional pounds on. Now, beyond that, we need to also think about, okay, what about as the overall calf market increases? Well, a higher calf market, no surprise, increases value gain. So at the same price slide level, if I look at $1.60 base price for the 550-pound steer calf in the same slide, that 80-cent value gain becomes $1. And I can kind of fill those out. Now, in truth, I've kind of highlighted a diagonal here that's kind of normal, right? You would almost never in a market see a fairly low calf price and a really high price slide, that they tend to move together. We tend to see big price slides when we see fairly high calf prices. So in 2014 and 15, we had a calf market north of $2 a pound. What we saw price slides in the $20 to $30 hundredweight range. In lower calf price markets, we tend to see more narrow or smaller price slides. So I've kind of highlighted that diagonal just as a rule of thumb, but usually value gain is somewhere between 70 cents and $1 a pound. And it can be higher. In fact, it was higher this past year due to high feed prices. So it evolves, but this is kind of what I think was more normal. But just know how the base price of calves and then that discount as they get heavier impacts the actual value of the pounds that you add. That's the key concept. It's going to apply to most everything I want to talk about the next 10 or 15 minutes or so. You want to know what the market wants and respond to those signals. And everybody's got to make their own decisions about what they do with their operation. And I've never been one of those that have, said that everyone should do this, this, and this, because everybody's different. What I think my job is to point out some opportunities, and then you decide, you know what, can I look at a way to meet that opportunity and add some value to some of the calves that I sell myself? So I'm going to look at just one thing here quickly. So this is the market report that came out today. So yesterday was Columbus Day. So today I got last week's price summary for Kentucky auctions, and you would have got something very similar in Tennessee. I use Kentucky though because I know how our market reporters tend to designate calves. And what I'm showing you right here, I've circled kind of this light 5-weight range. So the calves in that 5 to 550 range, I've circled those. So here's a large number of calves last week that sold for $1.65 a pound. Notice there's no descriptor by those. Okay, so those are the calves that ran through. Those were most likely green calves that sold in the marketplace. When our market reporters use the word value added, and I assume this is fairly consistent across the board, what they're really saying is those cattle have been at least through some sort of health program, not specific, but it really means they're not green calves. They've had at least a shot and they've been weaned. I just want you to notice this past week, there was about a 14-cent difference in what those value added cattle sold for versus what those green cattle sold for. Now, I'm not going to talk about fancy, although it's there. Fancy is the market reporter's way of basically signaling this was a really good, some really good groups of calves in here, lot size, quality, good looking cattle. So it's harder to kind of pinpoint the value there like I can wing calves. I'm going to just kind of focus on value added. But again, on that light 5-weight category, there's a 14-cent or so difference per pound in what those wing calves sold for versus those green calves. Here's the exact same thing for now my heavy fives. Now I'm in that 550 to 600 pound range. Again, those value addeds, sold for $1.76. Those nondescript about $1.64, 12 cents a pound. That's a pretty big difference. And that's premium itself. Then that's not valuing additional pounds that might have been added during that post-weaning program. And then again, here's the exact same thing for my light sixes. Okay, here's my nondescript cattle, $1.63, value added $1.82. So consistently, especially in fall and winter, we tend to see the market reward calves that are weaned and not sold fresh off the cow. And again, everybody's got to decide, can I do it? Do I have facilities? Do I have the time? That's your decision. But understand there are cattle producers out there whose business model is to buy those types of green calves, straighten them out, give them some shots, get them going, add some weight and resell them. So, there is value to be added there. The question is just going to be who's going to do it. Cow calf level, or someone buy it and add value downstream. Here's another one. One of the most common questions I'll get from somebody in Kentucky is they'll call me and they'll be about half mad when they call. And they'll ask me why bulls are out selling steers at blank market that week. And the truth is it happens sometimes. Inevitably it happens. We move thousands of cattle a day in Kentucky. You move thousands a day in Tennessee. You're going to see times when a group of bulls outsells a group of steers. I went back though and I pulled monthly price data from 2012 to 2021. So there's 10 actual years there, so 120 months. And I just grabbed that 550 pound steer category, kind of my typical weaning weight for a cow calf operation. There wasn't a single month when the average price of a 550 pound bull exceeded the average price of a 550 pound steer. In fact, if you look at that 120 month period, the difference was almost $12 a hundredweight. It was $11.66 per hundredweight. So that's $64.13 a head. Now, those of you that know cattle, you may well have a good follow-up question. You may say, Kenny, won't a bull outgain a steer? And yeah, there's data that says he just might. So I kind of like to pitch it this way a little bit. So let's kind of turn it around and say, okay, how many more pounds does that bull need to weigh to make up for that price discount for the fact that he is a bull? And that's one reason why I wanted to walk through that value gain stuff earlier. In a dollar calf market, that bull's got to weigh 65 pounds more to offset that discount. In an 80-cent value gain calf market, that bull's got to weigh about 80 pounds more to offset that. And that's a tall task. So I have to kind of frame it that way. I do think there's value. I do think there's value in selling steers that are bulls in most markets. There will be exceptions. There will be times you may not feel you got paid for it, but I think more often than not, you will if you choose to do it. And again, you got to decide, do you have the facilities? Do you have the time? Can you take the risk? That's your business. But again, understand there are people that buy these bulls out of these auction yards. They take them home, they cut them, straighten them out, and they resell them. So just to understand, value gets added that way. The other point I'll make, going back to weight gain, I should have done this a second ago. Sorry about that. But implants are a really good door number two. There is good data to show that an implanted steer will gain as well as a bull. So keep that in the back of your mind. Unless you're in a market that rewards you for selling natural type cattle that have not had implants, implants are a pretty inexpensive way to get additional gains associated with the growth, and at the same time get kind of that steer price benefit. So again, there's options here if you want to try and explore that. I've not talked about this near as much, but I've used it a few times. I put a Cattle Market Notes article on this sometime back in the spring. I like to look at our market reports over time and just kind of look for trends. And it's hard to tease out some things. Some things are easier than others. We can talk about frame size and whatnot, but I wanted to look at muscling. And in Kentucky, what I generally get is two categories of pretty good data. We tend to pull our medium and large frames together, and then our number 1 and 2 muscling. So, muscling scores 1, 2, 3, and to some extent 4, with those lower numbers being heavier muscled steers. So the only thing I can really do here is I can compare, okay, what does a medium and large frame number 1, 2 steer sell for versus a medium and large frame number 2 and 3 steer sell for. So I'm looking at the price discount for about a muscling score lower. So you think about a 1-2 versus a 2-3. So it's a little bit abstract, but I want you to understand the concept more than anything else. The black line there is my 1 and 2 muscle, my heavier muscled steers. My blue line there's my lighter muscled steers. And the difference over the last 5 years, so the last 60 months, I don't have this going back quite as far as I do my steer and bull data, was $14.83 per hundredweight. And folks, at 550 pounds, that's $82 a head. That's pretty significant. So if you feel like you're selling some calves that are getting pulled out because they're being viewed as lighter muscling when they're sorted at the yards, or you're having to do that yourself, perhaps, make this a culling criteria on your cows, or certainly look for patterns in bulls. If you can track them back, you may say, I've got, a bull or two here that kind of throws some lighter muscle calves. I don't think we talk enough about this, but you want to be selling calves that at least fall in that medium frame category, and you want them in that heavier muscle category. You don't want them dropping down to that 2 to 3 range. There's a pretty significant discount if you do. So I wanted to kind of walk through that: weaning programs, steers versus bulls, and muscling, because I think those are 3 pretty tangible market things that we can kind of get our hands around as opportunities to add value in most any market. And before I leave this topic, I want to just say one more thing. I've been at this a while, and I guess I'm in my 3rd cattle cycle now as an extension economist. But I remember distinctly, I can remember in, when was the year? In 2007, 2008, when calf prices were so low. I remember folks saying things to me like, Kenny, if that's all they're paying for steers or bulls, I'm not going to bother cutting my steers. Okay. And then in 2014, 15, they would say, man, if they're paying that much for bulls, I'm not going to bother cutting my bulls. I'm going to sell, and so in other words, in both an up market and down market, some producers would find reasons not to do the little management things that typically pay. And my argument's always been, good management typically pays. It pays in a good year and a bad year. There's some years in the cattle business you cannot make money. Well, we've been there before, right? We get there, but oftentimes we do better by selling the kind of calves the market wants. And again, everything I've talked about, there are businesses out there. There are folks that are buying the kind of cattle that need some attention. so they can add some value and upgrade them themselves. So just understand that value gets added this way. You can do it, or you can sell calves that somebody else can add value to. There's room for both in the system. I want to shift here to talk about lot size a little bit. And, this is something that I have to be careful of where I'm at because, it is, I don't want to say it's unique to the Southeast, but, but I live in a state where a lot of calves move in small groups. And I think you all do too. And it makes a big difference. So you're all well aware of this, but, feeder cattle move in 50,000 pound loads, 50,000 pound lots. This is what a semi truck holds. So a lot of our buying system, our stockyards, our order buying, what they're really doing is they're trying to put together light groups of these calves, small groups here and there to put together truckloads. They can ship a full truck out west to be put on feed somewhere. And there's been a lot of work done on this. In fact, I partnered with two of my friends and colleagues at the UT Department of Ag Economics, Chris Boyer and Charlie Martinez, on a project this past year, looking at several things, but lot size was one of them. And sure enough, we get our best benefit typically around 50,000 pounds. Lots can get too big, but that's kind of the optimal size, if you will, to move numbers in. Most of us can't do that. I certainly can't with the calves that we run. But I like to use this example in class, and I'll kind of show it now just kind of for illustration purposes. But let's say that two groups of cattle move through the yards in, Sweetwater, Tennessee. And let's say they're identical. They both weigh 750 pounds. The only, that they're identical. You couldn't tell them apart. The only difference is one of them has 65 head. The other one has 15 head. The group of 65 steers that average 750 is right at a potload. Lot B that has 15 head is about 11,000 pounds. So if a buyer buys lot B, what does he or she have to do? Well, they could ship lot B by itself, but they're going to pay almost 5 times as much transportation cost per head. So they're not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're going to try and find another, in this case, roughly 39,000 pounds of similar calves to go with them. But when lot B runs through the ring, they probably don't know at the time where they're going to get those other, 50 head of cattle. So they've kind of got to discount a little bit for that, not to mention the effort that it takes. So that's why a truckload, i.e. lot A, is going to outsell lot B, holding everything else constant. Now, this is the most technical thing I'm going to show you all night, but this is some work that a friend and colleague of mine, Greg Hallich, did back in 2015. But we collect data from pre-conditioned feeder cattle sales here in Kentucky. So through Bluegrass Stockyards, they've always been letting us use their data. Take a quick drink here. And we did a statistical analysis, much like your extension folks and my friends do there at UT. So we held everything constant that would have impacted the value of these cattle. We held their weight constant. We held their sort, their color, their type of cattle constant. We held the corn market constant. We held the fed cattle market constant. We held the time of year they sold constant. And statistically, in this particular graph that I'm showing you, we tried to look at, okay, holding everything else constant, what was the impact of lot size? Meaning, how was price impacted by how many calves ran through the ring at one time period? Okay, so your y-axis running vertically, this is the price improvement per hundredweight. Okay, and your x-axis here across the bottom, that's the lot size. How many head actually were sold in one cut? Now, mathematically, this is a natural log and a natural log squared term. So all you need to know is this right here is not zeros, or this is a lot size of 1. This is a single, right? So this is a single. From here, there are 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on. So just start with the big picture. The weight of these cattle was, I think, about 620 or 625. My memory serves me correct. So this was about a truckload, about a pot load. Okay, so holding everything else constant, a pot load of feeder cattle outsold a single by about 21 bucks a hundredweight, 21 cents a pound. And I can believe that. I see it here in Kentucky. I'm sure you see it in Tennessee. So, that's the big thing. But very few of us, including myself, are large enough to move potloads of cattle all the time. What I want you to understand, though, is the real lesson or the real story is on this left side. Okay. So, for example, sure, I would love to move truckloads of cattle, but this is a group of 15. This is a group of 10. Will a group of 15 outsell a group of 10? Well, the answer is yes, by about $2 a hundredweight. Will a group of 10 outsell a group of 5? The answer is yes, by about $4 a hundredweight. Will a group of 5 outsell a single? The answer is yes, by more than $10 a hundredweight. So to me, the real story isn't so much that I've got to be up here in the far right moving loads of cattle. It's that I've got to find a way to stay out of this far left, right? Singles, twos, threes kill me. Even groups of 5 and 10, which most of us can get to, make it a whole lot more beneficial price-wise, right? I give the buyer something to work with if I can move groups of 5, 10, and 15. Most of us can get there. So that's why uniformity in our calf crop matters. In my opinion, that's why calving season matters, right? I want more of my cows calving at the same time and early. So I've got bigger calves to sell that go into larger groups when they're sold. I just want to stay out of the left-hand side here. If you're a backgrounding or stocker type operation, if you're someone who moves heavier cattle, you probably know this, but use it to your advantage. Smaller groups can be a good buy. You can, cattle like real estate, you can make money on the buy sometimes. Getting a good group of calves bought at a good price has you halfway home usually. So, something a lot of those folks do is they try and buy some of those smaller groups, knowing they can put other cattle with them and have larger lot sizes. So, you could upgrade through lot size. And every auction yard's different, but I assume in Tennessee this also holds. Oftentimes there's commission savings when you have larger lot sizes too. Here in Kentucky, it can be about twice as much to sell, small groups versus large groups. So, keep this in the back of your mind. This is not, hold for every single market, but the concept definitely holds, is that, there's a big benefit to selling truckload lots, but the real story to me is just how much and how important it is to try and avoid selling, singles, twos, threes, giving the buyers something to work with. By the time I get to 10 head, I've really almost got about 75% of the benefit, if you will, of selling a truckload lot. And that to me is encouraging, even for us small operations like the one that I'm part of. We can deal with that. I may never move truckloads of cattle, but I can certainly try and avoid selling singles and twos. Last couple things I want to mention. We were always felt like short on risk management tools for the cattle business. We never had as many we never had as many risk management tools available to us in the cattle sector as we did maybe on the crop side. And the last several years, that's improved some. We have bought pasture, rangeland, and forage PRF insurance now for, I think, 5 straight years. Is it a perfect product? No, but it is a decent product. And it's a way for you to buy some coverage. It's basically moisture coverage, rainfall coverage. And I won't get into the details of it, but it gives you an opportunity to basically buy an index insurance product to ensure something related to normal rainfall in the area that your farm is located in. I'll put it that way. The subsidy is pretty significant. It's roughly 50% subsidy. So, what that means is year in, year out, you should receive more in indemnity than you pay in premium. Again, we've bought it. I think this is our 5th year. We've collected on it 2 out of 4 years. Thus far, we've collected more than we've actually paid. This past year, we covered June, July, August, and September. June and July did not pay. I don't know for sure yet about September or August, September, but I think we'll probably pay it. We'll probably get a little bit for August, September this year where we are. Be aware that it's out there. I spent the first probably, 8 years of my career talking about forward contracts, futures, and options. And, again, I was talking to a lot of cattle producers that don't move loads of cattle. And those of you that know a little bit about futures know that, a feeder cattle contract is 50,000 pounds of feeder cattle. So it was just not something very many of my cattle operations could use. If you've not heard or not looked into livestock risk protection insurance, give it a look. It's essentially a subsidized put option, meaning you're going to actually pay a little bit, quite a bit less actually than what you pay for a similar put option, but it's scalable. So you're not locked into 50,000 pounds. You can buy this insurance coverage on 10, 15, 20 head if you want to. Is it a perfect product? No, there's no perfect product out there, but it is a good way to get some price protection on a group of cattle that you plan to sell at some point in the future. Both of these products are available through a lot of your ag insurance type, you like ag insurance agent types. You may even have some of those already. So if you're interested in some of those things, talk to them. That we've more and more, I think we've got to find ways to manage risk on our operations. This helps some on the rainfall side. And again, price risk is becoming more and more a problem all the time. And LRP, as well as futures options and contracts, help us on the price risk side. Last thing I want to say, and I'm going to plead guilty on this because I do it some myself. When I talk to a group, and I didn't do that on purpose, but I'll oftentimes show a cow-calf budget, and we'll talk about, cow-calf profitability, and there's some value in that. But in reality, each cow is a multi-year investment. When a new heifer enters your herd for the first time, you're hoping to get, 8, 10 calves out of her, I assume. So I say that because although we can look at cow-calf profitability on a single year basis, in reality, the profitability of an individual animal is determined over her entire lifetime. I just want you to know that, market fundamentals are improving. I really do believe that this cattle supply is tight enough right now. We're going to see better prices in 2023. We definitely got some feel for that in 2022, especially on heavy feeders. In the summer, I thought this calf market might even be 15 cents higher than it is right now until the darn board pulled back on us for next spring. But bottom line is this calf market's going to be tight. So I think you're going to see some much better prices in 2023 and 2024. And I just say that because you want to be thinking several years ahead of time. You want to be making decisions right now about where you want your cow herd to be in the next 2 to 4 years. And that can mean a lot of different things. Some of you may say, you know what? The cull cow market's strong. Bred heifers are not quite as high, maybe as I think they're going to be. I'm going to upgrade my cow herd. I'm going to cull really hard, buy some good young breeding stock because I want to have a younger, high quality cow herd the next 2 to 4 years. I like that idea. Some of you may be on the other end of the spectrum. Some of you may be saying, you know what, Kenny, I really would like to retire from the cow-calf business in the next couple of years. I think you're going to get a really good chance in the next couple of years. So all I'm saying is make your decisions with a long-term perspective. Don't just think single year. Be thinking a few years out. And I think it's a good time to be doing that. Last thing I'll say is this, and you don't need me to tell you, but cattle business is tough business. It is. There's so many things that can impact our profits. Whether it be weather or markets or impact. So many things. And there's years when it's really difficult. There's years when we can do pretty well. But all I can tell you is that it's typically best to be better than average. And one of the flaws about someone like myself when I talk to a group is I try and present something in a way that kind of impacts the most people. So I talk a lot about averages. I talk about average winning weights, average winning rates, average prices, things like that. But the people that do the best year in, year out are the ones that do better than average year in, year out. And to me, that really is the key to being profitable long run. If everybody else is weaning 550-pound calves, you need to find a way to wean sixes. If everybody else is weaning 85% calf crops, you be weaning 90 and 92% calf crops, things like that. So again, don't be average. Sorry, leave you with this. Every week I partner with two of my colleagues, Josh Maples of Mississippi State and James Mitchell at Arkansas. We basically take turns every Monday writing Cattle Market Notes Weekly. This is an email that comes through MailChimp. It actually comes from Josh. Like I say, we take turns writing it. I actually sent one out today because yesterday was Columbus Day, so I didn't get a market report yesterday, so I did it today. But it's usually 4 to 5 paragraphs with some charts, a drought monitor, and there's some tables of prices in different states, with Tennessee being one of them. So we would love for you to get on that mailing list. We can send that to you every week. if you've got a phone that'll let you scan a QR code, that right there should take you immediately to the sign up sheet, and you can do that. If you can't read a QR code, and I have a fairly cheap phone myself because I'm a cheap economist that doesn't always read those very well, if you just want to email me, I'd be glad to get you on there myself. We would like to send you cattle market notes once a week. We enjoy doing that as a partnership. We enjoy people reading that. It won't cost you a dime. My last pitch on that is, because we're in Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas, it tends to be a little bit more feeder calf and cow calf oriented, maybe some other things out there. We don't talk a whole lot about fed cattle because most of our clientele are feeder cattle producers. So keep that in the back of your mind. But if you'd like to sign up for Cattle Market Note, we would certainly love to get you on that list and get you set up to get that on Monday afternoon. So I'm going to stop share and see if we have any questions. But again, I want to thank you for having me. And it was Sawyer, I think. So Sawyer, thank you for the invite. I appreciate getting to talk to this group of Tennessee producers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Burdine. We really appreciate it. Right now, it looks like so far we just have one question here in the Q&A box. Someone said they talk to cattle producers all over the United States, and the common thing that they're seeing coming is a huge fertilizer cost along with the dry spring and fall. They say they believe that we haven't seen a big sell-off as yet, but their question is, how long is this tight supply going to last? Maybe 2 years was part of their question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Answer it as best I can. So the part of the difficulty in answering a question like that is it's hard to know where cattle numbers are regionally throughout the year. We'll get an estimate here from USDA in January. If you look at cull cow numbers, cow slaughter, I think we've actually seen a lot of cows move. I think most of it from the Southern Plains, but I can tell you anecdotally, if you look at how many cows have moved through Kentucky auction markets, it's been pretty high. So I think we've actually moved more cows than maybe people think. So I think we're seeing that already. The second part of your question, the other good part of your question was how long it's going to last. Of course, that's a guess, obviously, you know that. But the difference, I think, in this particular one versus 2014-15, I think we're going to see prices compared to what we saw back then. But because costs are higher, and because especially right now we've got droughted so much of the country, I think we're going to build back slower. So my best guess is cow numbers are definitely down, coming into 2023. I think they'll be down again at least in 2024. And then time we start holding back heifers, I think we're looking more 2 to 3 years, maybe even 4 if weather didn't cooperate a whole lot. So I think the tight supply is going to last longer this time than we saw from 2014 and 15. So thanks for that question.
Thanks, Dr. Burdine. It looks like as of right now, we don't have any other questions in the Q&A. So if you have questions for Dr. Burdine, just put them in that Q&A box. Here's another one. Did I read correctly that China didn't import any beef from us just 2 to 3 years ago? And now you said they are our number 3 export partner. That's huge. Can you comment on what drove the change?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. And it's a simple answer. We didn't get an agreement in place with them until 2019. So that's what started it. And then it took, let me think for a second. So it started really slow. And again, I could have these years mixed up and I apologize, but it started, I think, in 18 or 19, and it was fairly slow. But then post-COVID, it's just taken off in 2021 and 2022. So it really was a function of the agreement we had in place with them. So keep in mind, too, they're a growing country, obviously, and incomes are growing. And, you got a large population with average income increasing. So as that happens, they're going to add more protein to their diet. They're typically a big pork producer, typically a big pork consumer. But beef has got a place at the table there too. And don't forget, African swine fever, which impacted China pretty bad on the pork side, probably gave us a foot in the door as well to kind of move some more beef in there. So good question, John.
Very good. And we've got a couple more. Thoughts on implants for heifers. Do potloads of heifers reflect the increase that steers do over singles?
Good question. And I'm sorry I don't have data to throw at you directly. I'm going to refer you to one of your nutritionists on that one, okay? And I apologize. If you're asking my bigger picture question about implanting heifers, if your intention is to sell feeder heifers, meaning if your intention is not to be selling heifers someone's going to buy as bred heifers, I see no issue with implanting them. A lot of people, though, will say that because some of these markets, some folks will buy some of those heifers for breeding, they don't want to be implanted. I get that. But it's really a function of what your intention is from the get-go. So I don't have an issue with it if your intention is to go feeder cattle market from the start on those heifers.
All right. Next question is, what weight do most feedlot buyers prefer when buying a load of calves?
These are great questions, sir. So as any economist will say, it depends. Most feedlot operators will tell you that they would like to have cattle that are at least preconditioned, so not something green off the cow. The reason it depends is because it depends very much on feed costs, right? So right now we're in a high feed price environment, and the sweet spot right now is they would prefer to buy 7 weights and above. They would rather buy 750, 850 pound steers right now because cost of gain's high. They would rather start with heavier feeders that need less feed to finish. In a lower feed price environment, they would rather buy some of those lighter cattle that have maybe just been pre-conditioned for a period of time because they can make more money, add additional pounds. So it depends on the market some, but in the current market, there's an incentive right now, I think, to move heavier feeder cattle because feed prices are so high.
Very good. Looks like we have one last question here. If you were about to wean a group of 600 to 800 pound calves and had the hay and land to feed them through the winter to sell in the spring, do you think it would pay off to hold them over?
Good question. Of course, it's specific. So the way you frame that question, I assume what you're telling me is that you've got the calves, you've got them on the farm, and you're in good shape on feed. So if that's the case, and I'm in your shoes, I probably am going to keep those calves through winter if that's what I normally do, because I think the market will probably reward you for that in the spring. And the fact that you told me you were in pretty good shape on feed cost. Now, if you were going to be buying a bunch of stored feed, or I'm going to be buying a bunch of, corn and bean meal or even commodities, soy hulls, corn, gluten, I would definitely run a budget on that. But the way you frame that question is you think you've got the store, you think you've got the feed on farm to do it. I think it makes sense to keep them. I would do that if I were in your shoes.
All right, we've got a couple more come in. How much weight variation within a lot is generally acceptable?
Really good question too. Okay, so this is one of these that I have actually had to reach out to people about myself. Short answer to the question is, I think when you get above 100, there's red flags, right? What most of your stockyard operators will actually tell you, though, is that they would like to see weight variation no more than 50 to 75 pounds. And I think that's kind of the rule of thumb that I tend to use. Something else to remember, and I didn't catch who actually sent the question in, but it makes a little bit of difference too on how many cattle are in there, right? So if you think about 10 head of cattle standing in the ring, right, 100-pound spread is going to be really obvious. If it's 50 head, it's not going to be near as obvious. So I think it's even more important on smaller loads if they're tighter. Does that make sense? So that's how I look at it. I think the answer is 50 to 75 pounds, but I also know that that's hard to get sometimes. So you've kind of got to balance that spread with that lot size. We talked about price benefit.
All right, we got one more question, but this one is specifically addressed to me. John Teague asks, where are the links to the recordings for missed sessions and the surveys for confirmation of attendance? So as far as links, I'm not 100% sure. Let me get with Dr. Mason or Mallory and see if we can't get those links out to you. And then once the webinar ends, then you'll get a prompt to answer a survey, or you'll get a follow-up email that's automated to complete that survey, which I'm glad you asked that question. I was instructed to remind everybody to take that survey at the end of the webinar so that we can kind of get some feedback. And it looks like somebody just replied and said the links in the calendar, invites, and emails work for the recordings. I'll give it just a couple more minutes to see if anybody has any last burning questions before we completely end the webinar tonight. Got one more question. Economically, does it make sense to put loads of heifers together versus putting steers together? This fall, our load of heifers brought 10 cents less than our steers. We bought the heifers for about the same amount as the steers.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, given what you said in that case, you paid the same for steers and heifers, it would not have made sense. I usually try and work through that kind of in a budget, budget basis. But when you get, so the differential between steers and heifers price wise obviously gets narrower as we add weight. So, you said 10 cents a pound. I'm guessing you were moving 750s or 850 pounds, something like that. That should translate to difference of about 15 cents a pound when you buy them as calves. So that's kind of how I like to look at it. Heifers will work fine. We don't do heifers ourselves, but it's because it's hard to have mixes with us, small scale. But it comes down to the buy. You've got to get those heifers bought cheap enough that you can actually come out on them. So, again, simple answer to your question, but if you expect a 10-cent difference in sale price on the back end, you need to get them bought about 15 cents cheaper on the front end. So in your case, it makes sense why it didn't work. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Dr. Burdine. We've had a couple of folks put in the Q&A box. Just thank you for the information. They said that they found it very helpful and informative. And so once again, we really appreciate you taking some time to come and speak to our Tennessee beef producers today. So if there are no other questions to be asked, I think we're good. Once again, go ahead and take that survey once this webinar ends. We've got another question. Does location of the stockyard to an interstate affect the price a buyer will pay for the calves?
I've not seen any work on that, so I can't cite anything on top of my head, to give you something tangible, but I can certainly see how, especially in certain situations, if weather's bad, there might be some advantages simply because it's easier to get cattle out of there. We have had some situations in Kentucky where we've had, a sale schedule, for example, and ice storm hits or snowstorm or something, and I can see how proximity to interstate might be beneficial there, but I can't point to anything tangibly that's been actually studied. Sorry about that.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on keeping some steers for custom processing?
Yeah, great question. And so we do this on a small scale. I actually really enjoy doing freezer beef. You can make really good money per head on freezer beef, and I do enjoy doing it. And I think the biggest benefit of all is you learn so much about your cattle. I grew up in feeder cattle country, like a lot of you all probably, and I was never used to looking at finished cattle, and I've really developed the eye that I needed to really, what does a finished steer look like? So there's lots of benefits there. So the opportunity is there, the market's there. Couple things to be aware of. Number one, it's very different. I can't tell you how many people have started in the freezer beef business and they just simply did not know what it took to finish cattle. So what they did, they delivered basically 1,000-pound feeder steers with absolutely no finish to the processor. And that's a recipe for an unhappy customer. Secondly, I can't speak to Tennessee, but knowing some of the things I've read that have come out of Tennessee, I expect y'all are similar to Kentucky in this sense. We are a little bit light on local processing capacity. Like right now, we've got processing dates ourselves scheduled a year out. So that's another challenge. So if you can plan ahead, and if you can get processing dates, I think it's definitely worth it. I would definitely tell you to start small, just because that's one of the nice things about freezer beef is, you can do a few head the first year or two and kind of feel your way through it. It's a great opportunity. It takes a lot of work and a lot of planning. And most consumers, frankly, just cannot handle a half a steer, that they just don't have enough, either, money to begin with, or they don't have enough freezer space. So, you're kind of fighting that all the time, but I love doing freezer beef. I enjoy fooling with it. I love talking about the cattle producers. It's a good opportunity. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much. Right now, we don't have any more questions. So if there's no more questions, I think that does it for tonight. Once again, Dr. Burdine, thank you. We really appreciate you coming to speak to us. And we will see everybody back here on Thursday night. Thanks.
Thank you all for having me. I always, like I said, I wish you good weather and good prices. So.
Thank you very much. We'll see y'all later.